We've invited our partners in faith here today to stand with us against death, to proclaim life, to stand against destruction, to proclaim another way, to stand against the United States Congress welcoming Benjamin Netanyahu, and to proclaim that there is no place in this land of the free and home of the brave for someone charged with crimes against humanity. Evil is sweeping the land that we call holy, and when we fight evil with evil, evil wins. With that in our minds and hearts, Riverside Church will join thousands of those who stand for the goodness of all human life in Washington, D.C. tomorrow for a day of prayer, marching, and advocacy. Crimes against humanity are not welcome in these United States, and Benjamin Netanyahu should not be given legitimacy or a platform to address the United States Congress. As followers of Jesus Christ, Riverside Church grounds our embodied justice belief in the understanding that all people are made in the image of a loving God, regardless of how they name God or if they name God at all. We refuse to pick one baby over another or one grandpa over another. We honor life and mourn those killed in the brutal attacks of October 7th. Our long and deep relationships with Jewish communities and leaders mean that we stand with Jewish people in the U.S. and abroad, condemning attacks on them for reasons of religion, ethnicity, and culture. We also refuse to be silent in the face of the current massacre of Palestinians in Gaza, the denial of humanitarian aid, and the lack of a plan to end this destruction and the occupation. Those Palestinians who have managed to avoid the Israel Defense Forces are now homeless, hungry, and heartbroken. We do not believe a God-loving people would continue this ongoing annihilation. The Riverside Church in the city of New York calls for a just and permanent ceasefire, the release of civilian hostages, an immediate and adequate aid distribution in Gaza, and the release of prisoners. We encourage all people of faith and lovers of life to do the same. I'd now like to invite my colleagues forward to share remarks. First, we'll hear from Reverend Amanda Hambrick Ashcraft, who is the Executive Minister for Justice, Education, and Movement Building at Middle Church.
Good morning, and thank you, Reverend Thorne and Riverside Church and colleagues. It's nice to be here together this morning. I bring you greetings as a Baptist minister, consulting with Middle Church, as a mother, and as a fellow human being in our global world. I am appalled. Let me not parse words. I'm appalled that Congress is giving Benjamin Netanyahu a platform. Him who the Center for Constitutional Rights has urged the Justice Department to investigate for plausible genocide and torture. Him who the International Criminal Court has declared his actions in Palestine war crimes, and who ICC Chief Prosecutor Karen Khan is seeking an arrest warrant. We know why he's charged. We've woken up every day since October 7th, many of us long before then, to the horror of what is happening in Gaza and in the West Bank at the hands of Netanyahu. Starvation of civilians, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body and health, willful killing, intentionally directing attacks, extermination and murder, persecution. I didn't make up those words. I'm not exaggerating. It is what he's charged by the court that is literally tasked with handling these matters. But folks, here is the sobering piece. My appall is countered by my pragmatism. Because we, these United States of America, are complicit in every single thing Netanyahu has been charged. We fund it, we hide it, but that's getting harder thanks to brave journalists, Palestinians, and freedom fighters. And we bless the intersection of militarism imperialism, white supremacy, Christian nationalism, and Christian Zionism, and allow it to flourish. Shame. It is sinful, but not the first time we would platform one who has caused such deep, immeasurable suffering. Shame on our Congress for inviting him, shame on any Congressperson who listens to him tomorrow, and shame on us for our complicity. We stand here today unflinching as faith leaders, united in disgust and outrage, and with moral authority. We reject his address. My faith is shaped by a Palestinian Jewish rabbi who always stands on the side of the oppressed, one that champions peace, justice, and love, not as abstract concepts, as actual directives for how we might live. Netanyahu is in direct opposition in this moment to peace, justice, and love, and must be shut down. Now, when we reject so strongly, we also must ask, what are we claiming? What kind of world are we visioning and building? And we claim the flourishing of all people. All people are God's people. Here in these United States, in Sudan, the Congo, Haiti, Ukraine, and in Palestine. We claim that greed, power, and empire rot the abundant life that our Creator God has fashioned for us all. We claim that that life is still possible, but platforming a war criminal moves us away from the promise of liberation, not towards it. We implore Congress to listen. We ask continually how we are complicit in either the diminishing of life or in the flourishing of it. Palestine is certainly freeing us all. May it be so, and may it be soon.
Friends, we will now hear from the Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer, who is the director of the Interfaith Center of New York.
Good morning. My name is Chloe Breyer. I'm director at the Interfaith Center of New York and associate at St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Harlem. I think I will be redundant if I say that this has not been the easiest time to be doing interfaith relations anywhere in the United States, but particularly in New York City. And thus, what I'm going to say today reflects my own views and not those of my organization. Why am I going to be protesting Netanyahu's address to Congress tomorrow? Well, I have a few concerns. First, I am concerned about the apparent prioritization that Netanyahu has made of killing his enemies over the lives of a generation of Palestinian children and the 108 remaining hostages that are still kept. I'm concerned about this retributive and revengeful war that prioritizes the death of so many over the lives that are possible to be saved. I am concerned about the war and the assault on his own democratic institutions within Israel. I have signed up to stand tomorrow with a group called Trua Rabbis for Human Rights, a rabbinic call for human rights. These are folks who identify as Jewish and as Zionist and as anti-Netanyahu and as anti-occupation. They have, unfortunately, too often been demonized by folks who should see them as allies and not enemies, Let's widen this tent, folks, because the real threat is too great. I'm standing with the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, with Israelis in the hundreds of thousands who were exercising their democratic right against Netanyahu's autocratic direction way before October the 7th. There are great resources among Israelis themselves to be a check on, again, the autocratic tendencies of Netanyahu. And it is a real shame that our Congress has made it more difficult for those to be exercised by giving him this platform tomorrow. And finally, as a seminarian back in 2000, in the waning days of the Oslo Accords, I had the opportunity to go with other seminarians and some religious leaders to what was then an open West Bank, and indeed a Gaza Strip that we could enter and leave from, albeit not easily, but still possible. It was a time in the summer of 2000 when there was still hope for a two-state solution, which then came crashing down when Ariel Sharon walked on the Temple Mount later that fall. Netanyahu has not shown himself to be a friend to a two-state solution, and in fact, any kind of future solution that makes space for Israel and Palestine. For that reason, I will be protesting him tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Chloe. I would next like to welcome my colleague, Sunita Viswanath, who is the Executive Director of Hindus for Human Rights and the co-founder of Sadhana, Coalition of Progressive Hindus.
Namaste. I'm Sunita Vishwanath, and I'm honored to address you as the Executive Director of Hindus for Human Rights, an organization dedicated to promoting peace, justice, and human dignity. We are participating in tomorrow's protest against Prime Minister Netanyahu because we reject the United States' decision to fate, respect, and honor a leader who currently stands accused of genocide and crimes against humanity before the International Court of Justice. With the official death toll in Gaza at 40,000, and the real number probably much, much more, and the knowledge that it is America, we, that are bankrolling this genocide, we cannot be silent. When President Biden rolled out the red carpet for Prime Minister Narendra Modi last June, we protested outside the White House then, and we will do so again tomorrow to protest Israel's authoritarianism, religious nationalism, human rights abuses, and now genocide against Palestine. Both Netanyahu and Modi are responsible for horrific violence and abuses in their respective countries, and both should be unequivocally condemned by anyone who claims to support human rights. As a faith-based human rights organization, our values are universal. Our stance against injustice knows no borders. Whether it is in Palestine, India, or the USA, we stand united in our commitment to uphold the dignity and rights of all individuals. As Hindus, we are guided by the principles of ahimsa, nonviolence, satya, truth, and karuna, compassion. These core tenets compel us to speak out against the violence and oppression faced by the Palestinian people. Our faith teaches us that every individual shares an equal inherent divinity, and it calls us to stand against all forms of violence and to support the right to self-determination of all peoples. The genocidal violence currently being enacted against the Palestinian people by the war criminal Netanyahu is antithetical to these cherished values of our faith, and it is our dharma, our sacred and moral duty, to advocate for an end to this carnage and to support the establishment of a free and just Palestine. As Hindu Americans, we must express our deep regret and shame regarding the Indian government's complicity in this genocide. India is one of the largest clients in the world for Israel's military-industrial complex. And recent investigations from Al Jazeera have found shrapnel from bombs dropped on Gaza with the words "Made in India" printed on them. This shameful complicity in genocide is a betrayal of our own history of anti-colonial struggle and solidarity with Palestine. It is our moral responsibility to speak out against this complicity and to call for a return to India's legacy of standing with oppressed people around the world. As we in America look towards upcoming elections, our advocacy in Hindus for Human Rights transcends political affiliations. Our core values remain human rights, inclusive democracy, and peace. We must hold all candidates of all parties accountable to these principles, ensuring that they protect the rights of all individuals, especially marginalized communities, and especially the poor of this nation. We will put pressure on all candidates to end the carnage in Gaza and work towards a free Palestine. In closing, I want to reaffirm Hindus for Human Rights' unwavering commitment to fighting for human rights and justice nationally and globally. Just as our anti-Zionist and non-Zionist Jewish siblings are advocating for peace and justice from a Jewish perspective, Hindus for Human Rights is building a radically inclusive movement of Hindus and allies opposing Hindu nationalism and caste. Join us in initiatives like the Not on Our Dime campaign, seeking to ban New York-based charitable organizations fundraising to support the Israeli military and their genocide in Gaza. And join us tomorrow as we travel to DC to protest Netanyahu. I will end with an ardent prayer. Loka samasta Sukhino bhavantu. May all people everywhere be happy. Thank you. Shukriya. Dhanyavad.
Sunita, thank you for blessing us with that prayer. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Minister Connor Foley, who is the outreach minister at the First Presbyterian Church of Brooklyn.
My name is Connor Foley, and I'm the outreach minister at the First Presbyterian Church of Brooklyn. Our community has responded to this moment by forming a group called Becoming Peacemakers, through which we've dedicated countless hours to education, activism, and solidarity work with our Christian, Muslim, and Jewish siblings in faith here and in Palestine. I was just in the West Bank a month ago to meet with Christian Palestinians who are dwindling under occupation, who feel betrayed by a Western church that has ignored them, and who have called upon us to witness to the living stones, the ones who have lived in the land for over 2,000 years and who are not museums or artifacts, but living souls who deserve justice. I got to see firsthand the violence of the Israeli state and its settlers, and it clarified even more sharply for me that I'm a settler too, living on stolen land, and helped me better understand my own investments in our colonial project. But the only fellow settler I know of who properly understood the stakes of his role in this moment was Aaron Bushnell, the young soldier who set himself on fire rather than be complicit in genocide. He set himself on fire to try to get us to care. Jesus tried getting us to care too. His death was a way of asking, would you care about state violence if that state tortured and killed God? Jesus says in Matthew 25 that the crucified people of the world are God. Jesus is them and they are Jesus, each life infinitely and eternally significant, and every single crucifixion condemns us. But do we even care? Because reframed for today, we could ask, would you care if an IDF attack dog mauled a Palestinian man with Down syndrome to death, whose first and last words were, "Enough, darling"? Would you care if a young girl was shot 355 times while crying out for help? Out of 186,000 slaughtered, could any of their stories, even one, make you care? Would you care after seeing 15,000 children dismembered, hanging in tattered ribbons from rubble? How much Palestinian death does it take to earn our compassion or our intervention? How much Palestinian death for you to risk something personally to interrupt what will haunt us forever? To be honest, this moment is testing my belief in the limitlessness of God's grace. On some days, I hope hell is real, even if I can't imagine a punishment worse than what I see in Gaza every day. I hope I'm destroyed for my complicity in these horrors, so there might be some sense of justice in this world. But I don't know how God will judge me or us. I only know that we have to do everything in our power to confront this evil to its face and exorcise the demon spirit of U.S. imperialism, settler colonialism in all its forms, and white supremacy in all its iterations. We have to be the apocalypse that ends this horrific world. We have to end this world for Palestine. But I'm joining the action on Wednesday because we also want to witness to a quiet hope, a flickering ember protected in our hearts by the Spirit of God, a hope that Palestine might actually be free. Maybe we go to scream into an abyss, knowing our ruling class laughs as it drives us into annihilation, unfazed by our pain or our anger, but maybe a tide can turn. And people will recognize their power, and the resistance to this genocidal project will flower and flourish, and the purveyors of violence will be brought to their knees, and justice will prevail. We await a miraculous dispensation of courage and moral clarity, and we make ourselves available to the prophetic witness that might catalyze this turn. So on to Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor, for those remarks. We'd now like to invite the Reverend Mark A. Thompson, who is the host of Make It Plain, a political, human rights, and breaking news podcast.
Good morning. It is an honor to stand here with some of my comrades who I know well from being along the barricades together, and thankful to the Reverend Adrian Thorne for hosting all of us here. Tomorrow is a very important day and an inevitable day. The moment we heard that no good Netanyahu would be coming here to the United States, the mobilization became almost, if not totally, organic. And why is that? This has been the largest resistance to the Israeli apartheid regime in recent memory and in recent history. It is high time that this has happened. There has been so much cumulative injustice over the years, and so many times people have been beaten down and punished and persecuted for standing up for our sisters and brothers in Palestine. It is not a metaphor to call what has happened historically and what is happening now apartheid. That is a direct description of what is taking place. And why do I say that? I discovered this despite the appearance of my youth over 40 years ago. In high school, we had what some may recall, I don't know if they still have it, something called Model United Nations. And in the Model United Nations, I represented the country of Zimbabwe and had a non-permanent seat, of course, on the UN Security Council. Apartheid at this time was still raging in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was still imprisoned. And in my research to draft a resolution, a Security Council resolution to end apartheid, I discovered, as many of us did, that the Israeli regime was a staunch supporter of the apartheid regime in South Africa. That is why as soon as Nelson Mandela was freed, he sat down with Yasser Arafat, as I would later in my own life. Not only that, Israel helped the racist apartheid regime in South Africa develop a nuclear weapon. There are no more resolutions in the United Nations condemning a particular nation than there are resolutions historically condemning Israel for its role in upholding the apartheid South Africa regime. And so there is that history, the apartheid then and the apartheid now. That is why we must march. Now, we're in church. Everyone here presumably is nonpartisan. But let us be clear, Bibi Netanyahu isn't. He is persecuting this war to save his political hide. And also don't be fooled, he supports a particular candidate in the elections here in the United States. Right-wing, as Sunita has alluded to, nationalism, right-wing nationalism in Israel, right-wing nationalism, Christian nationalism in America, right-wing nationalism wherever it is right-wing nationalism. And that is what we are here to oppose. Also, we also are people of faith. And sometimes as people of faith, we have to be clinicians. And as clinicians, we want to help the Congress out with some of its schizophrenia. Leader Schumer at one time said that Israel needed regime change, which was very unusual, very unprecedented, and somewhat courageous for a leader of the Senate to say. And then within days, signed the invitation for him to be legitimized by speaking before a joint session of Congress. That is an honor. That is an honorific. That is a form of legitimization that he does not deserve and does not need. And we applaud those members of Congress, particularly the Congressional Black Caucus and others, including the Vice President, who will not attend. Lastly, let me say that this is a sacred space where we stand. Dr. King went to Boston University, got his PhD in systematic theology with the hope of being an academic and coming to Union to teach and possibly even serving here at Union. Those he studied Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the martyr, who was at Union. But history took another turn. Those opportunities weren't available to him at the time, and he was called to Montgomery. The rest is history. Perhaps if he had come here, he might have kept his life. I was here in this sanctuary several years before Dr. King's chief of staff, Wyatt T. Walker, passed away. And it was here that he said in that very pulpit that Dr. King signed his own death warrant 1 year to the day when he died, April 4th, 1967, speaking out here against the Vietnam War. Who are we to be as followers of the modern day Christ, Dr. King, if we don't stand up against war, if we don't decry war, if we don't say the things the martyr said, lest there be no other martyrs, lest there be other martyrs like Dr. King, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. This is our duty to do so. And lastly, I'll say also in memory of a recently departed ancestor whom I knew. I was raised in the church in which he first served in Nashville, the home of the Nashville sit-in movement, the Reverend James Lawson. If Dr. King was Christ, Reverend Lawson was John the Baptist. He was the first to go to India, Sunita. Dr. King sent him first. He said, go in 1957 to learn about nonviolent civil disobedience. He was a conscientious objector, Reverend Lawson, when it came to the Korean War and went to jail for it. He organized the Nashville sit-in movement and the I Am a Man movement, the Memphis sanitation workers strike. We were so thankful that before he passed away, as we were producing our ceasefire song, I called Reverend Lawson. I said, Reverend Lawson, would you like to be in your first music video? He said, what is that? I don't know anything about that, Mark. I don't want to do that. I cajoled him and talked him into it, and he got it in one take. We couldn't talk about a ceasefire without the living, at that time, living prince and apostle of nonviolence. Right before we released the song, I got a call from Beyonce herself. She wanted to release a country music song, but she heard, Reverend Mark, I hear you are releasing a song of your own. I said, yes, we are. And she said, is it true that the apostle of nonviolence himself, Reverend James Lawson, is in the music video? I said, yes, he is, with an assortment of other great leaders. And she said, well, Reverend Mark, I better wait, because if I release my song, your song, especially with Reverend Lawson in it, is going to overshadow mine. Our song did come out first. She supported it. And we have Reverend Lawson, the last one of his last acts on earth, speaking out, not just speaking out, but in a music video, standing for justice in Gaza. Dr. King said, true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. Tomorrow we stand, and we will never surrender standing for justice for the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza. God bless you, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Mark, for those powerful words. In closing, I invite my colleague, the Reverend Mira Salani Joyner, who is the Minister for Justice, Advocacy, and Change here at the Riverside Church, to bring closing remarks.
Thank you, and thank you to all my colleagues who have come together today for this very last-minute press conference, and also for standing with us tomorrow as we oppose Netanyahu's speech to Congress. Now, the reason why I felt compelled, and Reverend Thorne and members of our community felt compelled to bring an interfaith contingent together to protest Netanyahu's speech to Congress, is because we've seen our faith being weaponized to justify this war. We've seen that it has escalated anti-Semitic violence and Islamophobic violence. But the core tenets of our faith, and I think of all our faiths as interfaith people, is for the preservation of life. It is to help the needs of the poor. It is to protect the vulnerable. It is to center the marginalized. But instead, this war has put people on the brink of starvation, leading to death. It has displaced tens of thousands of people. It has killed women and children. And therefore, our faith cannot be used to justify this war. We need to stand together and show solidarity, to say that we oppose this war and demand a permanent and lasting ceasefire. And our work will not stop on July 24th. The Riverside Church, and I'm sure many of my colleagues here, are committed to the work of liberation well beyond July 24th. And we will not stop until every hostage is released, every prisoner is set free. We will not stop until peace is restored and equity amongst all people are achieved, whether they are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, or atheist, whether one is Palestinian or Israeli, we believe everyone has the right to thrive. To that end, we're pleased to announce that in partnership with FOSNA, that is Friends of Sabeel North America, we will be hosting Reverend Dr. Isaac Munther here at the Riverside Church on August 14th. We will continue this conversation. It will not end here. Because of our own commitment to the liberation, healing, and thriving of Black and brown people here in this nation and worldwide, we will continue this fight. Because in the words of the late freedom fighter Fannie Lou Hamer, nobody's free until we're all free. Thank you. Peace and amen.